Hello, my people, and welcome back to Module 18. And this is going to be all about psychoactive drugs. And again, psychoactive means mind altering, right? So again, remember the psycho means mind. So these we're talking about mind altering drugs, okay, and their effect within our body. All right, so first, before we get started, we have to know what a psychoactive drug is, right? So it's a chemical substance that alters perceptions and mood, essentially affecting your conscious self, right? So again, think of mind altering, psychoactive drugs, again, alter our mind. And before we talk about, before we dive into our three categories of drugs we're going to be talking about today, we have to talk about dependence, addiction, withdrawal. We have to know what these all mean and how they affect our body as we learn about it. So, continued use of psychoactive drugs produces a tolerance. And a tolerance is with repeated exposure to a drug, the drug's effects lessens. So you're going to end up needing more and more of a substance as you have a tolerance. So, for example, I have a very high caffeine tolerance. So I have my Diet Coke with me. Here it is. Let me take a quick sip. Pause for dramatic effect. And the reason is that I'm still drinking caffeine throughout the day. I mean, I've had probably 3 cups of coffee, and now here I am with my Diet Coke, but it's because I have constantly put caffeine into my brain. So I am slowly going to need more and more caffeine throughout the day to give the same effects. There's some people who have 1 cup of coffee for the day and they're wired, right? So we all have different tolerances. When it comes to these different types of dependencies. So again, the more that you expose yourself to a drug, the more and more you're going to gradually need. So, and this is where, we see people really, they sell all their stuff for, drug money, and it can really turn into this really downward spiral because you're always going to need more, right? So when we talk about drug substance dependence, it technically means that our body adapts to the repeated use of the drug, just like I said, meaning that our brain, so if I constantly have say that like I have a constantly dopamine flowing through my brain through the drugs I use, my brain is going to say, oh, well, I guess I don't naturally need to make this anymore, so I'm going to stop. So our brain can actually stop producing a neurotransmitter that we naturally would produce if we are the ones putting more and more in. And this is what would slowly lead to withdrawal symptoms if we don't take the drug anymore. So, essentially, when we think, oh, here, let me move my camera so you can read that. Say that I'm getting a bunch of dopamine from this drug that I'm using. And, if I stop, even though my brain naturally produces dopamine, if I stop taking the drug, my brain has always already thought like, oh, I'm already producing enough, so I'm going to stop making more. And this is where withdrawal happens. So physical dependence or slash addiction is a physical condition caused by a chronic use of a tolerance forming drug in which it could be abrupt or gradual, but your body craves it, and if you don't get it, it's going to start making you go through these withdrawal symptoms, which we'll talk about. There is also such thing as psychological dependence, right? Which is mind dependence, where the state that involves your emotional motivation, where, you're constantly thinking, oh, okay, I need to go find my next fix, right? Because you are also psychologically dependent on your drug as well. So, for me, if I can't find coffee in the morning, my God, the first thing I'm thinking is I need to get to the closest Starbucks pronto, right? So there's 2 types of dependence. And this leads us to withdrawal. So withdrawal is, it has a variety of symptoms that can occur when a drug-dependent person stops taking the drug they're addicted to. And it's not fun, right? I've watched many videos, I watched the intervention show a lot, and it's not easy. It's not easy, right? But there's fatigue, headaches, tremors, sweating, vomiting. There could be many more symptoms, but your brain has stopped getting a drug that it's used to you giving it, right? And so withdrawal could last, days, or it usually lasts for a few days. But remember, your psychological dependence is still there, where you need to start teaching yourself, you do not need this, right? So it's a whole bunch of things going on. But withdrawal, your body is shaking because it's so used to getting something, right? So again, yeah, these are the physical withdrawal symptoms. And then here is some of the psychological withdrawal symptoms. So people sometimes have dysphoria where they're so out of it because they're in such pain from the withdrawal that they might imagine things. Depression can form out of stopping a drug. This is also the reason that, after you used to get your wisdom teeth, they would used to give you Vicodin. And we realized very quickly, or at least the doctors did, that Vicodin is a highly addictive drug, right? And you're giving it to teenagers. And so they stopped giving Vicodin and putting it to a lower level. I forget what they give now. But it could lead to being depressed if you no longer have this medication. It could lead to anxiety, agitation, reduced motivation and ability to experience like happiness in your life, because it's so ingrained to you if you spend time in this kind of state. So there's also not only physical symptoms, but there's psychological within your brain as well. A few misconceptions about addiction, right? So addiction is a craving for a chemical substance despite its adverse consequences. And what adverse consequences means is despite its bad consequences. You could be kicked out of your house and you won't care, right? So it means that no matter what happens to you, you don't care, you need the drug, right? So no matter what the bad consequences are. So one of the myths is that addictive drugs are quick to corrupt. It is not. Addiction starts slow. It's like, oh, I'll only try this at a party. Oh, well, I have nothing else to do, so I might as well try it now. Oh, well, I'm bored. Let me do it again and again and again. It's not a quick process. It slowly builds. I started my caffeine addiction back in middle school. So here we are today, but it slowly evolves. Addiction cannot be overcome voluntarily. This is also a myth. It can be. It is hard. You usually need a lot of support. That's why they still have, people can go to AA meetings and get their sponsors. You usually need to have a really big support system to keep you kind of on the wagon and not to fall off again. And number 3 is addiction is no different than repetitive pleasure-seeking behaviors. Addiction is completely different. It is a physical and psychological need that your brain pushes on you that you need to have, where pleasure seeking is you are addicted to the feeling of, either skydiving or, you like the dopamine rush, right? But it is very different than addiction. All right. So this is kind of where in your notes, these are the 3 big categories that we're talking about today. So psychoactive drugs are divided into 3 groups. So first we're going to talk about depressants, then we'll talk about stimulants, and then we'll talk about hallucinogens. So again, these are drugs that can mimic neurotransmitters in our brains, right? That can trick them into having these feelings, right? So again, we're talking about depressants, stimulants, and hallucinogens. So now we're going to dive into depressants. So depressants are drugs that reduce neural activity. They slow your body down. So again, so your neural pathways are going slower when these are in your body. Alcohol slows down movement. There's a reason you should not be drinking and driving. Your reactions are slower. It's harder for you to focus. Your brain is not as quick of working as it usually is, right? So alcohol, barbiturates, which is tranquilizers, these are usually used in, hospital settings, and opiates. Opiates are one of the most addictive of the drugs that we will be talking about. And again, people who crave these depressants is because they want to slow down their mind. So these are ways that people slow down their mind. They depress the neural system. So, when we talk about alcohol affects motor skills, judgment, and memory, increases aggressiveness, reducing self-awareness. It slowly deteriorates your brain, just like we were talking about earlier today with the myelin sheath. It all slowly starts to kind of short circuit your brain. And remember, so again, depressants, they depress your system, right? You're slower in reacting. Again, the other ones, so barbiturates, these are drugs that depress the activity of the central nervous system. They reduce anxiety, but they also will impair memory and judgment. Usually you won't remember much of if you're on it. You usually see this a lot in hospitals, right? People really like the strong barbiturates that really calm your body down if you're in a lot of pain. And we don't really see this a lot on the streets of street drugs. But again, it's a way that slows down your body. And number 3, just like I said, the most abused drug is opiates. It's the most highly addicting. It's one of the few things I will, I always say this, not trying it once is not even worth it, right? And so opium and so essentially it's morphine and heroin. And this is what comes out of opiates that are man-made. And it depresses neural activity to the extreme, and it temporarily makes people feel nothing, right? So if people are craving to get away, this is the one they usually go to, and it's one of the most addictive drugs. Again, it depresses your system, it lessens your pain. So a lot of people who are on pain medications after surgery can get addicted that way. I want to say that's actually the quickest way to get addicted to pills is like after a surgery and you don't want to stop taking them. But opiates, again, one of the most highly addictive ones. And just to show drug overdose rates with opiates, it's very scary. Heroin is a very scary, scary monster. And what it does is it gives you a blissful feeling for a few hours, followed by a craving for another fix. So people are stuck in the cycle of either looking for their fix, experiencing it, or having withdrawals, right? And it's not a life that I would wish on anyone. But drug overdoses are very high with opiates. So again, very, very scary, very, very scary. Let's see. Yep. So usually, so if you guys I used to watch Live PD a lot before it's closed down, but a lot of people would carry Narcan on them because it counteracts a heroin overdose. So like you'll shoot it into their system, and it usually metabolizes. It takes up all the heroin that's in their body, and it wakes them up right away. So there is ways. So cops and firefighters carry Narcan on them because heroin overdoses are so common, and it can actually bring people back if they catch them in time. But yeah, awful, 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 awful. Okay, so now we're moving on to stimulants. So we had depressants, which depress the nervous system, and now we're all about exciting it. So stimulants are drugs that excite the neural activity and speed up body functions. And at the top of the list, my people, caffeine. Let me pause for another Diet Coke drink break to further show you my progress. I'm no longer fighting my caffeine addiction. It's just a thing, but hopefully one day I will cut it off. So caffeine and nicotine. They are the most addictive legal drugs, right? And people don't really think, when they think of drugs, they don't really think of caffeine and nicotine, but it's just legal, right? And so caffeine and nicotine help with concentration. They help with, staying focused. And they are very, very highly addictive. Here we are. And then we will talk. So another stimulant is cocaine. Another one is ecstasy, amphetamines, and methamphetamines. Okay, so we'll talk about each one of these. So real quick, again, caffeine and nicotine, they increase heart rate, breathing rates, other autonomic functions. So again, a lot of people who drink more caffeine sweat more. So I wonder why I sweat so much. Probably because my body temp is up. So there is some side effects with these. I also know that nicotine and caffeine help with digestion because they speed everything up. So why do people smoke? People smoke because it's a social reward. A lot of the times people start with just because their friends are like, oh, I'll try it, right? And it all starts with peers a lot of the time when we are on the younger end. And just remember, it's not a pretty picture. And I do know that I looked at the stats for our generation now, and I want to say cigarette usage is down only to 7%, which is awesome, because when I was in school, it was like at 35% for the youth having cigarettes. And I know that, it was 18 to buy cigarettes when I was in school. And I know a lot of my friends went to just go buy cigarettes because they could, right? And then all of a sudden they were addicted because they're like trying it with their friends. They're like, this is okay, I don't really need it. But then all of a sudden it becomes a more regular thing. And that's where the addiction happens, right? Because nicotine is very addictive. Again, why do people smoke? Smoke. There you go. Nicotine takes away unpleasant cravings. So actually, a lot of people who are recovering alcoholics or drug addicts smoke because it's an easier way to get rid of one craving and add another. And this one just happens to be legal, right? So another interesting fact that I was researching, nicotine itself is rewarding, and people get dopamine hits when they smoke because they have correlated it with their reward system. Okay. Cocaine is our next one. So cocaine induces immediate euphoria, followed by a really big crash. So remember, it excites, it totally overwhelms the synaptic gap. So remember, we were talking about the synapse. Again, it can be, crack can be a form of cocaine, it can be smoked, it can be sniffed or injected. It blocks the reuptake of dopamine, so it brings more dopamine into your body, right? So it's an agonist. So it takes away, it doesn't let you you know how the reuptake, it allows more it allows more dopamine to hit your brain, which again is the reward center. So again, dopamine has that connection now, right, with the one that we just learned today. And again, it blocks the reuptake of dopamine, that just like I said, so the brain is flooded with dopamine produced. So again, agonist lets it all through. So it is pretty, oh gosh, it's a time. So anyway, the brain increases risk of strokes, you know, so here's just a list of how, you know, everything can go wrong. Again, would not recommend my people. It is a scary time. Okay, so now moving on to ecstasy or MDMA. Try to say that's the full term for methamphetamines. So MDMA, it is a stimulant and a mild hallucinogen. It has a little bit of both. It produces a euphoric high. It can damage serotonin producing neurons because it overstimulates your neurons. Remember, like I said, it can literally singe your synapses if it is used over time really often and frequently. And it can actually cause permanent damage in your mood. And your mood can actually be permanently damaged in your frontal lobe and your impairment of memory. A lot of cases, people who have been addicted to MDA for a long periods of time have actually, they don't recall certain parts of their life because of their memory was so impaired due to ecstasy. So now we're going on to hallucinogens, which is our last little subtopic. And hallucinogens are psychedelic and they're mind manifesting drugs that distort perception and evoke sensory images, even when there may not be any sensory output showing. So this is where you start to see things and hear things, and hallucinogens actually give people kind of insight on how people with schizophrenia feel every day, because remember, this is an overactive dopamine, right? So hallucinogens, there's two main ones that we're talking about today. So there's a lot more, but just for, you know, the textbook, we have LSD and we have THC, right? And so LSD is a powerful hallucinogenic drug that is also known as acid. So again, it makes you see things that aren't there, maybe hear things that are not there. And then on a milder form, THC, so weed is a type of hallucinogen that is, it's part of the hemp plant that triggers a variety of effects that again can include mild hallucination, but for the most part, THC has the kind of the relaxed aspect that a lot of the ingredients for the plant back up. But a lot of, you know, it all depends on the levels of what people are experiencing, right? Or the strength, I should say. So the influence on drug use. So this graph shows the percentage, and this is like an older graph. It was used in our old textbook, and I should update it. But this graph shows the percentage of U.S. high school seniors reporting their use of alcohol, marijuana, and cocaine from the 70s to late 90s. If I were to see this now, I would think that you know, alcohol definitely has increased, and same with marijuana. I'm not sure about cocaine. I don't know too much about it in these newer studies, but just kind of a little aspect for you to see where we're at. And so so each end of this unit, so this is, you know, the wrap up of our unit. I will talk about hypnosis very mildly. It's a very short video, but, you know, we're looking at the biopsychosocial perspective, right? So we have our bio influence, we have our psychological influence, and we have our sociocultural influence. So, and then it's all centered around drug use. So when we think of drug use, biologically, It's the dopamine reward circuit that makes it addicting genetically, right? So there's genetic, and also, alcoholism can be genetic. So there is family tree involved where you can, if you have a lot of alcoholics in your family, it can be passed down genetically where you're more likely to fall into that cycle as well. Psychologically, a lot of things happen, like lacking sense of purpose that could start people trying different things, significant stress. A lot of people start to use drugs as a negative coping skill, and it just turns into a huge dependency. Sociocultural, the environment that you're in. Are your peers trying drugs? Are your peers doing this? Are the social culture, your peers are a huge influence in all this, right? Marketing, TV shows you watch. If you notice, all the bad guys in like the earlier shows would always be smoking cigarettes, right? So it's all this, it's just these different influences that all come together that kind of make sense of drug use. Influenced it for drug prevention and treatment. Just this is kind of how we can end this little lecture is, education about long-term effects and costs. It will destroy your life. It is not it's essentially you see people selling their house, selling everything they own, losing all their family and friends because no matter what, it all depends on the next hit, right? And it is not cheap. Efforts to boost people's self-esteem and purpose. So again, so a lot of these communities come together, have treatment programs. Usually people have sponsors so they can have social support if they're feeling like they might go off the wagon. And attempts to modify peer associations and teaching refusal skills. So kind of like doing a little cognitive therapy with, if you're craving something, how can we redirect your brain to maybe do exercise instead, or, do hobbies instead whenever you're stressed. A lot of people tend to like chewing gum, right? So anything that will help kind of circuit the way that you think about it when you become stressed. I hope you guys enjoyed the drug unit of this little lecture, and I can't wait to start talking to you guys about it in class next week. All right, I'll see you for the last little video.